This episode of Enterprise Security Weekly is brought to you by IT Pro TV, an easy, entertaining approach to online IT training. Access over 2,000 hours of up-to-date, high-quality video content live and on demand. For a free 7-day trial and 30% off the lifetime of your account, visit itpro.tv/enterprise security and use the code ES30. Pony Express. Check out their line of penetration testing devices, including the Pwn Pad, Pwn Phone, and Pwn Pro. For enterprises, there's Pwn Pulse, providing continuous visibility into wired, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth spectrums across all physical locations, including remote sites and branch offices. For all those hard-to-reach places, there's Pony Express. Visit them on the web at ponyexpress.com. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. I am going to do some announcements about not just AnyCon. Oh, wait. No, it is AnyCon, which is the first hacker conference of its kind in Albany, New York. The event will take place on June 16th and 17th at the brand new Albany Convention Center in downtown Albany, New York. The event features a Capture the Flag competition, hardware hacking village, and ping pong tournament. Beat that, John. They have a ping pong tournament. It's
I don't
awesome.
know if we can top that.
We have to do something.
Do the CTF to win a hoopty, which is if you win the Capture the Flag, you get to win the car that we've been doing the wireless hacking to unlock the car doors and start the car.
That's
We're
awesome.
We're going to find the most old, decrepit car we can. And if you win it, if you win the CTF, you get that hoopty. But ping pong,
that's awesome. We got to do something like skeet shooting or something. Several tracks will be offered at AnyCon in a family-friendly environment. The keynote will be delivered by none other than Dave Kennedy or Dave Kennedy's clone. We're not sure which. Security Weekly will be there recording Hacker Movie trivia segments and giving away Security Weekly T-shirts and Hacker Movie-themed glassware. Go to anycon.info for tickets and register today. Security Week listeners receive a $25 off discount by using the code PAUL. That's P-A-U-L. IT Pro TV's courses now include Apple Certified Support Professional, CompTIA Security Plus, and ITIL Planning Protection and Optimization. Premium annual memberships include all video content, as well as access to virtual labs and Q&A forums. You'd pay $85.70 a month or $857 per year, but we've got a special offer for our listeners. For a limited time, get 30% off a monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription using the code ES30. Alrighty. So what did everyone think of the security vendor response to WannaCry?
I thankfully know hardly anything about it because I spent the entire week at a SANS conference teaching. So I'm really excited to have some experts here that can kind of explain it a little bit.
I thought the memes were great.
Yeah, the memes were great.
The memes, that's it.
Apparently, NHS was the and now was that the UK's like standard healthcare, like for the country, or are they just a healthcare provider?
I think it's a major hospital provider.
Okay.
I don't know firsthand,
Gotcha.
but I haven't used their hospitals. But yeah, they're a major player there.
And they were bit by the WannaCry, and then Sophos realized they had them on their website as a case study.
Yeah, that didn't go so well.
Did you see that, John?
Mm-hmm.
It was pulled down pretty quickly.
So,
fortunately, we have some of the images, which are awesome.
Yeah, I like being neutral with all vendors, but yeah, that probably didn't work so well for them. But from a hospital perspective, medical perspective, Siemens also was vulnerable to WannaCry. Their MRI or their SUP machine, that was surprising too.
Well, it actually wasn't surprising to me because most hospitals run XP, and XP needs SMPv1 to work, and thus they exploited it. And there was no patch until the Friday of that week. And you know, my wife works in the medical field at a large healthcare provider here in Rhode Island, and my most famous tweet actually goes back to when our third son, about a year ago, our third son being born, and her pointing at the monitor going, "Oh, look, it's the baby's heartbeat." And I'm like, "Is that Windows 98?" And my oldest son was in the hospital. Thankfully, it was nothing major. It was just turned to be a virus. But we had to take him in, stomach pains and fever. Not good. You think appendix in children. And we're there again. And I'm trying to be good, but, I can't help. I look around and I'm like, that's definitely XP that's driving whatever is on that screen. It was like the patient monitoring system.
Gotta let it go.
Oh,
Man.
I know. But, so, my question is, do they need to do file sharing, right? I mean, they could reduce it, but that still leaves so much more attack surface. Yeah. It's not just about that one.
And HIPAA doesn't cover any of this. I mean, it really doesn't.
And it clearly impacts patient care.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, patient care when the hospital's down, that's right. 100%. But if you're making a product that lives in a medical field only, unless you have an MRI back there somewhere, I don't think you do.
We don't, unfortunately.
We'll get you one.
It's on the fritz.
We'll put the chair in there and hook around the magnet. But it's only meant for HIPAA environment, and they don't design specifically for that in all cases, and that's really disappointing. Well, XP Absolutely. And that.
So whenever you said that HIPAA doesn't cover this, could you clarify that? Because I thought HIPAA did require patching. And I thought a lot of organizations have gotten fines for that. I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood the statement.
It does, but I mean, it seems like there are a lot of in any compliance. I think that there's a difference between security and compliance. So you can check a box and you can say we're compliant with this. That does not mean that you are secure. So I think that there has to be a reality check anytime you're dealing with compliance, and you need to say, well, what do we really need to do here rather than what are we required to do?
Yeah, in the compliance, John, I actually spoke with Josh Corrin about the compliance for healthcare organizations above and beyond HIPAA. I'm sure that was included in the discussion, but a lot of what the regulations are trying to say, and what he's working on them with is, well, it has to be patched. Well, what happens when there's no more patches issued for it? And he's like, your average medical device is in the field for X number of years, and that's well beyond what Microsoft's average is for supporting an operating system. And they're trying to figure that problem out. The other complicating factor is you could have a machine and update the patches, and then your software stops working. So your $1 million plus, or I don't know how much an MRI machine costs. It's more than $1 million probably. Who knows? But that could not work. So then what do you do? I mean, it's not just a cost thing, right? To diagnose people and save lives, you need this equipment. So it's not as easy as saying they have to patch their systems.
So one of the things I came across, and I think this directly applies. HIPAA says to patch an OS, patch a managed system. This MRI is a appliance, and vendors like to use this word appliance. It means you don't touch it, leave it alone, and there actually isn't a patch for the Siemens yet. Well, if it's running XP or whatever, there wasn't any vendor patch anyway.
Right. Yeah, it's how they just define what the patch is, too.
It's end of life. No more patches are being released. We're completely patched.
We're completely compliant, right?
Well, except for the one that Microsoft dropped, which is nice, a little behind, but...
supposedly they had that back in February, too.
Yeah, so, I guess when you get a call from the NSA and they tell you there's an issue, they try and do the best they can. But, what do you do with an appliance, right? It's managed by the vendor.
And speaking of vendors, obviously the security vendor response to this issue, I think a lot of us most of us in the community, were very critical of the vendors that were just blatantly marketing against this hype. And I think there was a lot of that blatantly marketing against this hype. I think that I think there are different levels of it, right? When I see every company under the sun, I'm like, you can blog about that, but you really don't or didn't help with the problem. But I don't want to exclude vendors that actually do help with the problem, because those do exist as well. In fact, we interviewed Amanda Russo from Endgame, who was one of the folks that reverse engineered the WannaCry ransomware, and talked about some interesting protections that they have in place for that. I've talked with Minerva Labs is another one that specifically focuses on ransomware detection. And a lot of the detection that I've seen, and what I don't want the community to do is just dismiss it all because there was marketing hype, right? There's actually good stuff going on. A lot of the And with ransomware, it's tough. But with a lot of malware, they're looking for they're doing anti-evasion or evasion technique analysis, right? Yeah. And that seems to be working out really well, or potentially working out really well as it works its way into products that when malware gets on the system, it does weird things like checking to see if you're in a VM or dipping into LSASS to look for shared credentials. Like, it turns out 99% of the average applications on the planet don't do that. So when you have stuff on your system that's probing to see what's on there that might catch it, that's a really valid approach for detecting malware. Now, what's interesting is this WannaCry virus didn't have that, largely because when you're ransomwaring a system, you don't need to persist. You just need to be there long enough to collect a ransom. And after that, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So, and I think that the WannaCry, as we discussed previously on Hack Naked News this week, the authors were just like, ooh, look, an exploit. Ooh, look, a backdoor that I can download. And, here's a packer and here's, a back protocol. And they just kind of pieced it together and threw it out there.
So I got a question for the people that are on right now, and I'd love to get some opinions on this. How do we feel about Microsoft releasing patches for systems that are woefully out of date and unsupported?
So coming from Microsoft back in the day on the security team, it's complex, right? So you have people that are still running these that don't have the capabilities or are limited to update. They should. I think that's the answer. They should update OSs. But if you don't have the option to do that, what else do you do? I kind of have this philosophy that WannaCry came through and it kind of was napalm to the entire internet. And it cleaned things, even though it's an attack. It hurt people. It caused damage. But it is kind of, Darwinism of the internet. Mm. And that makes it up to the executive level that may get these budgets for the new OSs or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think Microsoft did what they thought was right at the time and facilitated a patch for a problem. Most of the WannaCry stuff, version 1 or whatever, stopped anyway, but you had to facilitate something as a vendor. So I applaud them for doing the patch. The problem is then if you're using that patch, that means you're staying on XP.
It's also a dangerous precedent for Microsoft because then as new vulnerabilities come out, then they're going to have to consider addressing them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not completely unsupported. It's like kind of supported.
If it's bad enough, we'll support you.
Right.
Is that the precedent?
Yeah. And it's up to Microsoft, and that's the dangerous part.
And is that not sending? Is it possibly sending probably a bad message to executives that are like, we didn't patch. Microsoft released a patch when it was really bad, so I don't see why we should patch, because if it gets bad, Microsoft will just give us a patch.
Not just enterprises and executives, but end users too. I think that any time that this happens and it makes it into the news and people are talking about it on social media and it's going viral, and no pun intended, it's a security awareness for the public, and it elevates everybody's tinfoil hat status a little bit more, so that they are a little bit more aware of the things that they're doing, the things that they're clicking on, what's happening. Do they have backups? That they're getting tips as these things happen. People from our community are on the news talking about it, trying to squash some of the FUD, but also trying to educate the public. And I think that's really important.
What would you do? I like to play this game, both executive and security community. You own Microsoft. What would you do from the standpoint of the phone calls, the support? You have Gov also that still runs XP with support contracts. What would you do?
I know what I would do. Being the capitalist kind of asshole that I am, sometimes I would charge people for a patch. I'm not saying Microsoft should do that. It's an option. I have mixed feelings about it. I think Microsoft does have a responsibility, and I definitely get that from their culture that people that work there today and have worked there, like, they feel a responsibility to take care of their user base. I think they have we interviewed Steve Lipner, like the whole culture that was created at Microsoft, I think was fantastic. And he described some of that during his interview. So I have a lot of respect for that aspect of Microsoft and the community that they've built in wanting to take care of their customers. And look, let's be honest, a lot of the things that I think are biting us in the ass now are because Microsoft didn't want to break things for their customers and had to build in all this backwards compatibility. So, you know, I don't know. Would I charge my customers for a patch? I mean, maybe. I don't know. Does that help or not? I mean, does it just make people go, well, does it just segment like most of the population going, well, I don't want to pay extra for a legacy operating system just to get a patch, you know?
Well, some people are paying
for an extended contract.
I'll use Gov for example. They pay a lot. I don't know the number, but they pay for
less
support.
than what it would cost them to upgrade.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe about the same. Right? I don't know.
Or maybe it's a tax on them not, you know, being able to upgrade.
Consulting hours. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, well, whatever that number is, they did have to give them a patch, in my opinion, to those paying supported legacy customers. So if you're already making the patch, you just give it out.
What does it cost Microsoft to distribute a patch to the?
It was a $250,000-$260,000 back when I was there per patch.
Okay.
You know, just round numbers. You know,
right.
But that's significant.
It is.
But if you're making it anyway, you just give it out to people. The paying people paid to get it done, and you have the community. So,
right.
You know, and everyone's dealing with triage at the time. So it kind of does make some sense. But I think it will hurt in the long run of these people that have XP. And again, this vulnerability affected other OSs too. Or different versions of Microsoft OS, but I think in the long run they will stay on XP longer because they go, well, they support us, and maybe, and it's kind of seeing it from different angles. Yes, people should get off XP, but if you patch them, are the executives going to kind of see that as we get a little support?
But if you're an executive, what's the likelihood you're going to ask? So what are the chances that another remotely exploitable vulnerability comes out for Microsoft operating systems that affects XP? That you know what I'm saying? Like, how many more are in there?
So
who knows?
I have this weird philosophy, and I have to give Ryan credit for this. The friend I worked with, Ryan Kieran, you need to see the problem. Significant emotional event. A worm and viruses and things on the news every second, that's an emotional event to an executive. If you don't have that connection, I know they're bad, but if you don't have that connection, sometimes budgets are constrained. But if you see fire, sometimes people act quicker. Now, in the real world, I don't know how those apply business to business, but sometimes, as bad as this is, do people clean up from it?
Sometimes it's a wake-up call, and sometimes it's a Band-Aid, and you just keep going.
Is there an endpoint protection provider that supports XP? I know when I talk to a lot of them, they're like, yeah, we're working on it. Or some will also say, well, it works, but we don't support it because Microsoft doesn't support the operating system. Yeah, you can run an endpoint protection, but it won't run. Would that have saved you in a lot of these cases? Of course, is the other question. If it's good, it might.
Most of them didn't detect it anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm relying on third-party analysis. I don't have every endpoint software to run, but based off a third party that analyzed this at the time that WannaCry came out, the numbers were terrible.
In terms of endpoint software that actually stopped it, yeah.
If it was, and again, I'm trying to be neutral with all the vendors, but either it was, well, if you turned on the setting and you tuned it correctly, we would have protected you.
Yep.
Or if you would have had our super enterprise managed thing, okay. But it's really kind of embarrassing for the amount of money that's spent on this protection and for having a patch and a known issue. Take the NSA out of it, take everything. We all knew about it. It'd been months, or a month. And
well, the recommendation from Microsoft to disable SMBv1 dates back over a year.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad, to be honest. If you had an organization that really was demolished by this, yeah, there's major things to change within an organization. I saw a customer that had one machine infected. It happened to be a dev box, and it happened to be something that was joined to a guest OS or guest network. Fine, but none of their other systems were. They're segmented. So there are layers, but the endpoint protection software as a solution as the only layer of protection really weren't to the levels that I wanted them to be, with the exception of some, a handful. So comparing that to 100 endpoint protection piece of software, I didn't really get a warm and fuzzy internet-wide that we really have a hold on emerging threats.
John, do you somewhat feel some like vindication, because a lot of the recommendations that I know you're making to your customers based on penetration tests largely would have at least contained this attack?
I don't think I feel vindicated at all. The thing that I think we've been realizing over the past few years is a lot of the people that we do assessments for, a lot of my students at SANS, a lot of the listeners to Security Weekly, are the pointy end of the security spear. They're people that generally didn't get hit by this very much because they've been kind of paranoid for years. They've been listening to Security Weekly for a long time. They went through a class or they had a pen test. And I think what really bothers me the most about it, like I said, it was just kind of cool to listen to some people that have more experience in the trenches than I did in the past week. But the thing that scares me is realizing that the percentage of organizations that are even trying to do the right thing is much smaller than I think any of us really want to admit or own up to. I think that it kind of shows just how far behind the curve everything actually is.
I've been working with a lot of vendors, newer vendors lately, and one of the things that I think relates to this issue is, and I've heard this from multiple vendors, that when they speak to C-level executives, they have a tough time getting them to care about some of the issues that basically allowed this ransomware to be so successful, right? Active Directory security, patching, things of that nature. How do we change the conversation with our executives to make them realize that this is a huge problem beyond the organizations that John was just talking about? That's a tough question, I know.
It is. Yeah.
See, I ask the hard questions that I'm trying to search for answers for, and see if other people have better ideas than I do.
So I think it's kind of the upside-down pyramid, and a lot of organizations have this, is, I'll use you as an example, Paul. You have all the money, it's your company, but I advise you as a technical person to do something. But you're not familiar with, you've never been a capture the flag, an incident response issue, or you've never been in a fire. An actual fire. So you don't have that relation to understand when I say this is really bad. These are critical findings. Well, yeah, what isn't critical? I only come to you with critical things. So I kind of see both sides of that in my organization. Is I'm in both seats. So not only the recommendations but also the strategy there. A lot of companies have a problem getting executives that are non-technical or partially technical to understand this is critical and this is worth money X, or this is a decision, and money Y, and that's okay for our standing of our company, mom and pop or whatever. But if you're Raytheon, if you're Boeing, if you're, I'm just naming big companies, why are you not spending the money to do the right thing?
Well, I think that's our responsibility as professionals and practitioners, is that we should be able to explain things in simple enough ways that anybody can understand. We should be able to tie that to risk and say, if you don't do this, this could happen, and it will cost this, and it will affect our brand, it will do these other things. I think we have to take that responsibility, because just like we may not understand the complexities of the entire business like they do. I'm not an MBA. I don't know that kind of stuff. So they didn't go to cybersecurity school, so they don't know that stuff. So we have to find a common language, and I think that's on us, because it's our realm, it's our knowledge, and we have to be able to explain it in ways that they can understand, that they can weigh those risks against other business risks that they're dealing with.
So security.
I really agree with that. But one of the things that concerns me is the only way that you learn a frying pan is hot is by touching the frying pan. You can describe it being hot to a small child again and again and again and again, and until they touch it, they don't know. Trying to describe riding a bicycle. If you start going left, go right. If you start going right, go left. Just keep it right in the middle. You'll be fine. It's a concept that if you haven't actually tried to do it, it doesn't make much sense. And there's lots of things that kind of follow that. So I agree 110%. We need to have better communication with people that don't understand these things. But unfortunately, sometimes if you don't have that visceral context, my fear is that no matter how well you explain it, people still are not going to understand. So I hope that we
John,
can actually get around to explain
what
it.
you're saying is with executives, we should put them in timeout and take away their iPads?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I say that because my 4-year-old is like fascinated with knives and scissors and sharp objects.
You are a bad father.
Largely because, like John's saying, he hasn't gotten cut. And I'm like, dude, you're going to like lose a finger. Like, I hope that when he inevitably does get cut, that it's not that bad. And then he'll truly know, like, oh, scissors are bad.
So we mentioned earlier the frying pan analogy or other things. We've all been to conferences. We've seen Capture the Flag. We've lived in this industry. We know what it looks like. We know the feeling of, finding an exploit or getting through something during a pen test or patching something and being able to sleep at night. I really think our industry needs a better way of taking someone, executive or developers or otherwise, and dragging them into a experience of some sort.
We have that. It's called red teaming. Yeah. And we have offensive testing and other ways that we can simulate what could happen if ransomware hit or if spear phishing or if there's some other type of attack, whatever that is. We can demonstrate to them exactly what would happen and what they could get a hold of. I mean, that's exactly why those exist.
No, and I agree. I think we should expose executives to that and help educate. I also think we need to relate it to business continuity. Yeah. And Doug White, Security Weekly host of he's been on every single show on the network, actually. He's the only one. Even myself, I haven't been on every show on the network. But he was telling me a story, and he's been doing forensics and incident response since like the beginning of time. And he said, I had this client once, when we were talking about this ransomware problem, I had this client once, it was a small client, and they had a RAID array. And they noticed, like, one of the drives was failing. And they're like, well, I've got 2 other drives. It's totally fine, right? And now everyone listening is, like, groaning, right? And so the 2 out of the 3 drives fail, and they're dead in the water. And they called up Doug, and Doug was like, well, you're kind of screwed. And they're like, no, we want you to just recover the data. He's like, no, I can't. They're like, oh, can't you just take the platters out and recover the data? And he's like, no, I can't do that. He's like, you need like a clean room. And they're like, oh, well, we want to do that. He's like, it's going to cost like 10 grand to do that for this small company. And so they ended up not having backups, right, which is why they wanted to recover this data.
Sure.
And so they ended up spending the next 3 months rebuilding their entire accounting system from a paper trail. And that was their recovery. And I think we need to convey the message that scenarios like that are very relevant to security. And I think sometimes business owners don't understand. Like, they understand we need to have backups and recovery, but the security is in that same realm of business continuity. And we don't want to be in that space where we have to rebuild things from a paper trail. Now, if there even is a paper trail today, right?
So what's your feeling on WannaCry? We all agree was a bad thing. Brick or bot, bad thing. But let's look at it from a different perspective, which is what we're talking about before: an experience, bad experience. You don't want your kid get hit by a car. And you don't want them to cut their finger, but you need something, if it's hitting each other with Nerf swords or analogies aside, you need something where you have some experience and work your way up. How do we get organizations out of the, what I call the world of, you do your annual, not quarterly, but annual pen tests, and you have 10,000 findings, and then next year you come around, and here's your another 10,000 findings, are the same as last year, era. That's kind of how I see majority, or at least more than half of some organizations, and get them to a situation where WannaCry can come through and it's not a big deal. It's not, you're not taking down hospitals or otherwise. And we're seeing it from an approach of the intent of this virus was not money, worst business strategy ever if it was about money. And
their payment servers went down.
Yeah. Maybe it's some.
So even at some point,
stuff.
Even if you wanted to pay the ransom, you couldn't.
Yeah, that was funny. I think they're DOS for a couple times, but from a standpoint of these things really our internet Darwinism. What did we learn from this situation after the fact? You know, we're after the fact enough.
But and I think in that light, where we have to explain it to folks and not say, well, you know, you just need to do these things. And I think what a lot of people will take away from this experience is, well, I just need to make sure like I patch this one thing or make sure I, you know, make these configuration changes. And that's like a small part of security, right? Like security is hard. But making your environment more resilient to this type of attack or these types of attacks is completely different from what most people will take away from it. And that is, oh, well, you know, I can just go get rid of SMBv1 and I'm good. Maybe apply some patches, be a little more aggressive in my patching strategy. Like those are just like small little things that need to be encompassed in a much larger program.
So I'm definitely not a sports person if you ask anybody, but I'll use a sporting analogy. How many times you play football and practice the same behavior, the same actions you're going to do in real life? How many organizations actually deal with a tabletop exercise or a disaster outside production? And I think those numbers are really lower than they. Well, it's bad.
And I think that's the advantage of having exercises like that and penetration testing, right, is it tests your full security program. Yeah. And to come out of those exercises and go, oh, we can just do this like one or two things and be good, you're probably not. You're going to be like, wow, if we're going to survive that again, like we need to fundamentally change the way our security processes work.
I always say that you can't rely on an end user to secure their own things. Most people won't check the optional box to search through zipped files or whatever. So you have to make it easy for them. You have to make it so that the defaults are secure. You have to build it securely. You have to design it securely so that when these things happen, you're ready for it. I think that if we move from a reactive position to a defensive position where we're building resilient systems from the ground up, then we have a much better chance of withstanding when large things happen.
Yeah, because we say things like network segmentation and then no one does it. And then
it's hard.
But that's operational.
Right.
And I'm talking about actual design and architecture and coding and all those things, making sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of security, and developers and C-level and all these other people, engineers even, are not necessarily thinking about security. They're thinking about accuracy and performance and things like that. So.
Well, I still think that, you know, the concept of architecture and segmentation is part of that. I think the best way that we could look at something like this and learn from it is, Paul mentioned segmentation. If you had solid segmentation where your workstations are not able to communicate with each other, if you have segmentation and that a user ID can only log into a specific system and I can't use that domain token again and again and again and again and again. If you actually design your network properly, and we are seeing organizations that are doing this, it makes it far more resilient to these types of things. Because ultimately, as we've discussed many times, it is an architecture problem. If you look at absolutely every component in a building, every single component from every single 2x4 to every single column to every single truss has a failure point with it. And the engineers, when they design it in such a way, if that component fails, it doesn't lead to a catastrophic destruction of the entire building. And that's the way our IT architectures need to be. They need to be designed operationally, and they need to be designed architecturally, making the assumption that a compromise is going to occur, that a user is going to click on something, and damage is going to happen, but that damage is going to be limited to that particular account or that particular endpoint.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we're out of time on this episode, but I want to thank everyone for participating and thank everyone for listening and watching Enterprise Security Weekly. We'll see everyone next week.